August 7, 1944. Avranches, France. The summer sun beats down on a converted farmhouse serving as 3rd Army's forward command post. Inside, a man in cavalry boots and ivory-handled pistols stands hunched over a map table littered with reconnaissance photos, status reports, and coffee stains from 3 sleepless nights. General George S. Patton, Jr., traces his finger along the French roads leading east, not toward Paris, toward Germany. "We're not stopping," he says to no one in particular. "Not now, not ever." 300 miles north, in a meticulously organized caravan headquarters near Caen, another man studies the same theater of operations. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery sits in pressed battle dress, his black beret at a precise angle, annotating his planning documents with methodical precision. He has not slept well either, but Montgomery never appears rattled, never rushed, never uncertain. The plan, he tells his staff officers, will proceed according to schedule, no faster, no slower. 2 men, 2 philosophies, 2 massive egos that will clash repeatedly over the next 9 months. Their mutual contempt will create diplomatic nightmares for Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Their competitive rage will cost thousands of lives and waste millions of gallons of precious fuel in redundant operations. And their relentless, toxic rivalry will help destroy Nazi Germany. This is the story of the race to Berlin, of 2 commanders who despised each other so completely that they pushed their armies to breaking point just to prove the other wrong, of the Supreme Commander who learned to weaponize that hatred for the Allied cause. Just keep moving, that was Patton's philosophy. Those 3 words would become the defining tension of the Western Front's final year. The friction had been building since North Africa. Sicily made it personal. Montgomery had accused Patton of glory-seeking after the American general's unauthorized dash to Messina. Patton had called Montgomery a tired little fart who moved his armies like he was afraid they might break. But in August 1944, the gloves came off entirely. Patton's 3rd Army had become operational on August 1, immediately following the Normandy breakout at Operation Cobra. In 6 days, his forces advanced nearly 100 miles. The German 7th Army was disintegrating. Entire Wehrmacht divisions surrendered to whoever reached them first. Roads were clogged with burning vehicles and abandoned equipment. "Sir, we're outrunning our supply lines," Major General Hugh Gaffey warned Patton during a roadside briefing. "Then we'll use German supplies." "What about fuel?" "Siphon it from captured trucks, from dead tanks, from abandoned depots." Patton jabbed his swagger stick at the map. "I don't care where you find it, just keep moving." Montgomery, meanwhile, was grinding through the Caen sector at a rate of 2 miles per day. His British and Canadian forces faced the bulk of German armor, that was true. His casualties were appalling, that was also true, but his caution infuriated Patton and bewildered Eisenhower's staff. "Monty's fighting a different war," Patton snarled during a phone call with General Omar Bradley on August 9. "A 1918 war, set-piece attacks, artillery preparation, tea breaks." The comment reached Montgomery within 48 hours. His response, delivered to his aide-de-camp, was characteristically icy. "Patton fights like a cowboy. Cowboys are splendid for rodeos, less useful for winning wars." By August 13, the Falaise Pocket was forming. German forces were trapped between American forces pushing north and British-Canadian forces pushing south. It should have been total annihilation, the largest encirclement since Stalingrad. But the gap remained open too long. Montgomery moved methodically. Patton was ordered to halt at Argenton to avoid friendly fire incidents, with Allied forces converging from multiple directions. Between 20,000 and 50,000 German soldiers escaped through that gap. Patton stood at his command post, watching the reports come in, watching the enemy slip away. "Halt," he crumpled the order in his fist. "We should be in Paris by now. We should be at the Rhine." "Just keep moving," the words had become his curse. September 1, 1944. SHAEF headquarters, Granville, France. General Eisenhower calls a conference that would determine the future of the European campaign. Every major commander attends. The tension is suffocating. The question, how do we invade Germany? Montgomery arrives with a bold proposal. A single concentrated thrust through the Low Countries, across the Rhine at Arnhem, into the Ruhr industrial heartland. He calls it a dagger aimed at Germany's heart. He wants all available supplies, all available transport, all available fuel, and he wants overall ground command. Patton nearly explodes. "You want us to sit on our hands while you siphon off every gallon of gasoline on the continent." "I want to win the war before winter," Montgomery replies coolly. Your method will take until 1946. My method moves 50 miles a day. Toward what? Montgomery lines forward. Toward a supply crisis you cannot sustain. Eisenhower intervenes before the argument turns physical. His decision attempts to satisfy both men. It satisfies neither. Montgomery receives priority for Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne assault in history, designed to capture key bridges across the Netherlands. Patton receives permission to continue advancing, but with reduced fuel allocations. Reduced, Patton stares at the order. How reduced? 40%, General. Patton lights a cigar. His hands are shaking, not from fear, from rage. That son of a bitch, he says quietly. He's killing my army to prove a point. September 3, September 4, September 5. The Third Army advances slow to a crawl, not from German resistance, but from lack of fuel. Tanks sit idle on roadsides. Armored columns stretch for miles waiting for supply convoys that never arrive. Soldiers trade cigarettes for gasoline. Patton calls Bradley 17 times in 4 days, demanding his fuel allocation restored. George, the decision's been made. The decision is insane. We're 100 miles from the Rhine. There are gaps in the German line you could drive a parade through. Montgomery has priority. Montgomery has his head up his. George. Silence on the line, then Patton's voice, low and dangerous. When this is over, Brad, when we're burying our boys next to the Siegfried line because we stopped when we should have run, remember this conversation. September 17, 1944. The skies over Holland darken with aircraft. Operation Market Garden begins with 34,600 Allied paratroopers dropping behind German lines. The objective: capture the bridges at Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem. Create a corridor for British XXX Corps to drive across the Rhine. End the war by Christmas. Montgomery stakes his reputation on this single, audacious gamble. Patton watches the reports come in from his fuel-starved headquarters at Nancy. For the first day, he says nothing. By the third day, the picture is clear. The Eindhoven Bridge is captured. The Nijmegen Bridge falls after savage fighting, but Arnhem, the critical bridge, the bridge too far, remains in German hands. British 1st Airborne Division is surrounded, cut off, dying by the hour. Monty's boys are getting chewed up, Major General Manton Eddy informs Patton. I know. We could nothing. Patton's voice carries no satisfaction, only bitterness. We're sitting here with empty tanks while the greatest opportunity of the war slips away, not just his opportunity, ours. By September 25, Operation Market Garden is over. 1st Airborne Division has lost nearly 8,000 men killed, wounded, or captured at Arnhem. The bridge remains in German hands. The Rhine is uncrossed. Montgomery spins the operation as 90% successful. Patton's response, delivered to his staff, is immortalized in every Third Army veteran's memory. 90% successful means 0% victorious. There's no bridge across the Rhine. Monty's still stuck in Holland, and we're still out of gas. He pauses, stares at his map. When I get my fuel back, I'm going to show the world what happens when you just keep moving. While Patton raged and Montgomery regrouped, the German High Command watched the Western Front with growing confusion. At Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel and General Alfred Jodl studied the Allied disposition with equal measures of concern and hope. The Americans attack like men possessed, Jodl observed during a September 28 briefing with Adolf Hitler. No coordination, no patience, they simply charge. And the British? Hitler asked. Methodical, predictable, Montgomery prepares his attacks like set-piece theater productions. We know where he will strike weeks in advance. This observation was not comfort, it was opportunity. Colonel General Hans Krebs, Army Chief of Staff, developed the insight further. If we can exploit the gap between their philosophies, between American impatience and British caution, we can create confusion in their command. The strategy was simple: delay Montgomery with local counterattacks at obvious defensive points, force Patton to outrun his supplies by offering weak resistance along his axis of advance, then striking his flanks when his logistics collapsed. They hate each other, Krebs noted. Their hatred is our greatest weapon. He was wrong. Their hatred would become Eisenhower's greatest weapon. Throughout October and November, as the German army reorganized behind the Siegfried Line, Eisenhower made a decision that his historians would later call brilliant and his contemporaries called insane. He would give both men what they wanted, partially, simultaneously. Montgomery received authorization for a November offensive toward the Ruhr. Patton received increased fuel allocations for an offensive toward the Saar. "You're feeding their competition deliberately," General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, observed. "I'm motivating them. You're creating a horse race." Eisenhower smiled wearily. "Beadle, I've tried diplomacy. I've tried orders. I've tried appeals to their patriotism. Nothing works except one thing: they both want to beat the other to Berlin. What happens when one of them gets there? Then the war is over, and I'll deal with their egos at peacetime." December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, 5:30 a.m. 200,000 German soldiers emerge from the morning fog, 25 divisions, 1,500 tanks, the greatest German offensive in the West since 1940. The Battle of the Bulge begins. Within 48 hours, American lines across an 85-mile front have collapsed. The 106th Infantry Division effectively ceases to exist. The 28th Division is shattered. German panzers are racing toward Antwerp, threatening to split the Allied armies in half. Eisenhower calls an emergency conference at Verdun on December 19. The atmosphere is grim. Some officers speak of evacuation scenarios. Patton arrives chewing a cigar. "The present situation," Eisenhower begins, "is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster." Silence. Everyone looks at the map. The bulge is growing larger by the hour. "George," Eisenhower says quietly, "how soon can you disengage from the Saar and attack north to relieve Bastogne?" Patton doesn't hesitate. 48 hours. The room erupts. "That's impossible. You can't pivot 3 divisions in 2 days. The logistics alone." "I can do it in 48 hours, Patton repeats. Eisenhower stares at him. "George, this isn't the time for theater." "I'm not offering theater, Ike. I'm offering you Bastogne. 3 divisions, 133,000 men, a 90-degree pivot under combat conditions, through frozen roads, enemy air interdiction, and supply lines stretched beyond reason." Patton had already planned for it, days before the conference. He had anticipated a German attack. He had prepositioned his staff. He had drawn up contingency orders for exactly this scenario. "Just keep moving, even when the enemy thought you were committed elsewhere." December 22, Bastogne is surrounded. The 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored Division hold the town against overwhelming odds. German commanders demand their surrender. General Anthony McAuliffe's reply becomes legend: "Nuts." But legend doesn't stop artillery, and Bastogne's ammunition is running out. December 26, 4:50 p.m., lead elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division, Task Force Abrams, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, smash through German lines at Assenois. The siege of Bastogne is broken. Patton had done the impossible in 48 hours, exactly as promised. But Montgomery would have his moment too. As the Bulge crisis deepened, Eisenhower made a controversial decision. He temporarily placed American forces north of the penetration under Montgomery's command. It was logistically sound. Montgomery was closer. Communication lines were compromised. Coordination was essential. The Americans resented it deeply. Montgomery made it worse at a January 7 press conference, when he suggested that British forces had tidied up the American sector and that he had personally headed off the German offensive. The reaction was volcanic. Bradley threatened to resign. Patton called Montgomery a little limey bastard. Even the normally diplomatic Eisenhower drafted a message to the combined chiefs of staff that amounted to an ultimatum: Montgomery or me. Churchill intervened. Montgomery issued a grudging clarification. The alliance held. But the rivalry had reached a new temperature, and both men channeled that fury into the final push. February 1945, the Allies prepare to cross the Rhine. Montgomery plans Operation Plunder with characteristic thoroughness: 30 divisions, thousands of artillery pieces, elaborate deception operations, airborne drops, naval assault craft, smoke screens. The crossing would take place on March 24, not a day earlier. Patton cannot stomach the thought of Montgomery crossing first. "We're going to beat him across," he tells Major General Eddy on March 7. "Sir, we don't have the resources for a set-piece river crossing." "Then we won't do a set-piece crossing." That same day, the 9th Armored Division discovers something remarkable. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen is intact. German engineers have failed to destroy it. American soldiers charge across under fire. The Western Allies are over the Rhine. Eisenhower rushes reinforcements. Within days, 5 divisions are across. But Remagen is in Bradley's sector, not Patton's. Patton is furious. He will not be denied his own crossing. March 22, night falls over the Rhine at Oppenheim. Patton has assembled assault boats in secret. No artillery preparation, no elaborate plan, just infantry paddling across a 900-foot-wide river in darkness. The 5th Division crosses. The Germans are caught completely off guard. Casualties are minimal. By dawn, American soldiers are fanning out on the eastern bank. Patton crosses the bridge himself the next morning, stops midway, unzips his fly. "I've been waiting a long time to do this," he announces to the assembled photographers. "I'm going to piss in the Rhine." He does. Later that day, he calls Bradley. "Brad, for God's sake, tell the world we're across. I want the whole world to know 3rd Army made it before Monty starts across." Montgomery's Operation Plunder begins on March 24, 32 hours after Patton's crossing. It is meticulously executed, massively supported, and tactically flawless. It is also second. April 1945. The German Reich is dying. The Western Allies race eastward at speeds not seen since the breakout from Normandy. Patton's 3rd Army advances 50 miles in a single day, then 60, then 70. His forward elements capture airfields, liberate concentration camps, and accept the surrender of entire German corps. "We can be in Berlin in 2 weeks, Patton cables SHAF on April 10. The reply comes not from Eisenhower, not from Bradley, from Washington. Berlin would not be an American objective. The decision had been made months earlier, at Yalta and subsequent conferences. Berlin would fall within the Soviet zone of occupation. The political boundaries had been set. Eisenhower, ever the coalition commander, would not sacrifice American lives for territory that would be surrendered to Stalin in the peace. Patton is incandescent. "We're going to let the communists have Berlin, after everything we've done, after everything these boys have died for." It's a political decision, George. It's a cowardly decision. It's not my decision to overrule. Montgomery faces the same frustration from a different direction. His 21st Army Group is racing across northern Germany toward Denmark, toward the German naval bases, toward the German forces facing the Soviets. Berlin is tantalizingly close. But Montgomery is also held back. "The Russians will take casualties we're unwilling to suffer," British Prime Minister Winston Churchill admits privately. "Berlin will cost them 250,000 men. Let them pay the price." For different reasons, through different chains of command, both Patton and Montgomery are denied the ultimate prize. May 7, 1945, Germany surrenders. Patton stands at 3rd Army headquarters in Regensburg. The war is over. His army has advanced farther and faster than any army in history. 281,000 enemy dead, 386,000 wounded, 1,280,000 captured. But he did not reach Berlin. Montgomery stands at 21st Army Group headquarters on Lüneburg Heath. He personally accepts the surrender of all German forces in northern Germany, Holland, and Denmark. His signature appears on one of the most significant military documents of the 20th century. But he did not reach Berlin either. Neither man ever spoke to the other again after VE Day. The historical verdict on the Patton-Montgomery rivalry has shifted over 8 decades. Immediately after the war, Montgomery's reputation stood higher in official circles. He received his field marshal's baton, became chief of the Imperial General Staff, and was made first Viscount Montgomery of Alamein. His memoirs were diplomatic masterpieces that largely omitted his American rival. Patton died in a car accident in December 1945, never completing his own memoir. His legacy was preserved in fragments, colorful quotes, dramatic photographs, the profane genius of his tactical instincts. But historians eventually reached different conclusions. Patton was the most aggressive corps and army commander America produced, noted military historian Martin Blumenson. He understood armored warfare at a visceral level that few commanders ever achieve. Montgomery was magnificent at set-piece battles, British historian Max Hastings observed, but his caution cost opportunities that should not have been missed. Eisenhower, writing in his own memoirs, offered the most balanced assessment. Both Patton and Montgomery were indispensable, and both were impossible. I learned to use their talents while minimizing their friction. It was perhaps the most exhausting diplomatic task of my career, more difficult than dealing with Churchill, de Gaulle, or Stalin. The numbers support Eisenhower's management strategy. Between June 1944 and May 1945, the Western Allies advanced over 600 miles into German territory. They captured or destroyed 180 German divisions. They liberated 4 countries. They contributed decisively to ending the most destructive war in human history. Some historians argue that Patton's speed alone could have ended the war months earlier if he had received Montgomery's fuel allocations in September 1944. The war might have ended before the Holocaust's final spasm, before the Battle of the Bulge, before the firebombing of Dresden. Others argue that Montgomery's methodical approach prevented catastrophic overextension, that without his caution, the Allied advance might have collapsed into the same disaster that swallowed German armies in Russia. The truth likely lies somewhere between. What remains incontestable is that Eisenhower took 2 brilliant, egomaniacal, mutually hostile commanders and transformed their hatred into horsepower. He let them race. He let them compete. He let them despise each other, so long as they channeled that energy toward Germany. The rivalry was toxic, it was petty, it wasted resources and cost lives. It also won the war. August 7, 1945, exactly 1 year after Patton stood in that farmhouse at Avranches, tracing routes to Berlin on a battle-worn map. The war in Europe is over. Patton commands occupation forces in Bavaria. He is bored, restless, already feuding with military government policies, with denazification procedures, with every bureaucrat who fails to understand what warriors are meant to do. He receives a letter from an old friend, asking about the rivalry with Montgomery. Patton dictates his reply. Monty and I never agreed on a single thing except this. The only thing that mattered was beating the Germans. He had his way of doing it. I had mine. We both thought the other was wrong. We both thought the other was a damned fool. He pauses, lights a cigar, stares out the window at a Germany in ruins, conquered by Allied armies that had done the impossible. But we both kept moving, and in the end, that was enough. Just keep moving. Those 3 words carried 2 hostile armies from Normandy to the heart of Nazi Germany. They captured the essence of a conflict between 2 towering egos that ultimately served a purpose greater than either man could acknowledge. Patton wanted to race to Berlin. Montgomery wanted to march methodically into history. Neither reached the city they had spent a year pursuing. But their rivalry, petty, personal, and poisonous, became the engine that drove the Allied victory. It was not elegant. It was not efficient. It was not the brotherhood of arms that propaganda posters depicted. It was simply, brutally, undeniably effective. And somewhere in the calculus of history, that had to be enough.